Hey up. Right, I'm just going to think out loud in this video, because it seems to me that the sort of world of motorcycling is changing. I mean, it's always been in a state of flux, and it's continuing to do that. Year on year, sports bike sales are dropping, and the reason for that is that, well, sports bikes, as you become more mature and experienced, just aren't that much fun. Here in the UK, back in the 1960s, speed limits were imposed, 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, and on unrestricted roads, 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour on motorways. Back in the 1960s, the power output of motorcycles was generally between sort of 30 and 50 brake horsepower, with top speeds hovering around about 100 miles an hour. In a way, excessively overpowered for the speed limits on the road. But fast forward 65 years, and it's not uncommon to see motorcycles with 150 brake horsepower with a top speed well in excess of 150 miles an hour. Yet, the speed limits have remained the same. These machines are ridiculous. And of course, we've now got this trend with governments in the UK lowering speed limits everywhere. There was a time when they were talking about raising the national speed limit on motorways to 80 miles an hour. Now they're actually talking about taking 10 miles an hour off the existing speed limit. So it'll be 60 miles an hour on the motorway, 50 miles an hour on unrestricted road, and, we've already got 20 mile an hour speed zones everywhere. Now, they use the excuse that this is about safety, but what I think is really behind it is the move to electric vehicles, because the faster an electric vehicle goes, the less efficient it becomes. So if they lower the speed limits, less electricity is going to be used, which will protect our already fragile electricity grid. So really, all these high-powered motorcycles are just two-wheeled white elephants. And then, if you remember, about a year ago, 18 months ago, I made a video explaining that the European Union were putting some new measures in place to force even tighter environmental restrictions on motorcycles. This will require that new electronic control systems have to be fitted on motorcycles, which will make them much more expensive, and some manufacturers have even warned that in a lot of cases they're not going to be able to make bikes complex, so they will have to discontinue models. But there is a get-out clause in this particular legislation, is that it only applies to motorcycles capable of travelling 80 miles an hour or more. Now, high-powered motorcycles are already ridiculously expensive. They're going to get even more expensive. The motorcycle market is contracting. And motorcycle manufacturers, irrespective of nationality, have started to realise that actually if they're going to survive, they need to bring out lower-powered motorcycles, which they can offer considerably cheaper, restricted to less than 80 miles an hour top speed, to revive their fortunes for the future. So, as I've been saying for about the last 3 years in different videos, the future of motorcycling is in sub-500cc motorcycles. Now, I get a lot of people from America saying that, these sort of motorcycles are just not powerful enough for the roads in America, and you can substitute that for Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere else in the world that isn't the European Union. The point is, any environmental restrictions that the European Union put on motor vehicles travels to the rest of the world, because there's no point building different machines for different geographical areas, because it just complicates the manufacturing process, which means the price of all motorcycles goes up when it doesn't need to. So, whatever the European Union says a motorcycle or motorcar has to be in respect of environmental controls, everybody else gets it as well, whether they want it or not. But the truth is, a lot of other governments tend to adopt the European emissions regulations anyway, so, that's a moot point. Now, I know none of this that I've already said has really got anything to do with modern classic motorcycles, and you clicked on this video because you thought it was going to be about the changes to the modern classic motorcycle industry. But I had to lay that information out at the beginning of this video because the problem is a lot of people I know are just ignorant to what is going on. So I needed to go over all of that to help people understand what's happening going forwards. So first of all, why are modern classic motorcycles becoming so popular? Why is it, a growing sector, depending on which news source you read? Especially the sub 500cc category of modern classics. Now, for years we've heard the claims especially from the motorcycle press, that it's the born-again biker phenomenon. It's old men trying to recapture the youth by buying bikes that look like the bikes that they owned back in the youth. It was always portrayed as being something a bit sad and pathetic, something that they sneered at, but despite that, the phenomenon of the modern classic motorcycle continued to grow. Now, we're going back sort of 20 odd years now. Triumph reintroduced the Triumph Bonneville. Now, it was the old air-cooled version. It had grown to 865cc, so it was still considered a man's bike, a masculine bike by the standards of the time. And it turned out to be a very successful model. You see, 20 years ago, that bike was appealing to the 50 or 60-year-old, the guy that had a bit of extra cash in his back pocket, that had ridden those kind of bikes back in the 1960s in his youth. Now, I don't see this as trying to recapture your youth. I see this as an investment in your own personal history. As we go through life, we become an amalgamation of our own personal experiences. Our experiences through the years make us who we are. We get older, but we also get wiser. Motorcycling, for a lot of people, it gets under your skin and it runs through your veins. Now, for a lot of bikers that had to give up motorcyclists as younger men for family and house buying, etc., they'd never forgotten that and they wanted to return to it as soon as it was practically possible. And this is where the older and wiser bit kicks in. When they returned to motorcycling, they found that motorbikes, certainly since the 1980s, had become a part of fast fashion. A marketing strategy that actually gave their products a very short shelf life. There was a time I remember back in the mid-1980s when the big Japanese four would literally bring out a new model every 18 to 24 months. And it wasn't just a tweaking of an existing model, although it might bear the same name. It was a complete, from the ground up, redesign. Different shapes, different colours, different engines, different chassis. Everything would change, which meant your 2-year-old motorcycle that you'd just finished paying for was now out of fashion. You would buy the new, improved, latest and greatest model, and then 2 years later you would find yourself in exactly the same boat again. And it's not just motorcycles, it's everything from cars to furniture to clothing to mobile phones. It's a vicious cycle. It's a wasteful, frustrating experience that is perpetually emptying your bank account. And you can never get ahead of it. You will perpetually just be stuck in that vicious circle. Well, these older guys 20 years ago had realised that. As you get older, you realise that all this latest, greatest technology in any product that you buy doesn't actually bring much to the table except a bigger price tag. They wanted bikes with all the technology stripped away, so it was just an honest, down-to-earth motorcycle. And even better, the new modern classic Triumph Bonneville was a classic, timeless design. There was no inbuilt need to constantly keep replacing it. And not only that, it was far less expensive than contemporary design machines. Now, fast forward to 2015, 2016, again driven by emissions regulations. The new Triumph came out, it was now water cooled. The engine size had bloated up to 1200 cc's and it was twice the price of its predecessor. And then just a few short years later, along came Royal Enfield. Now, I'm a big fan of Royal Enfield, as you know, but And let's be clear, I'm not saying this as a form of criticism. Despite its success, Royal Enfield is not an innovator. It's just doing what it's always done. Up until about 10 or 15 years ago, Royal Enfield had just, for decades, continued building what was, in essence, a 1953 Royal Enfield Bullet. It had been tweaked here and there over the years to keep up with emissions regulations so that it could be exported to other countries. But they reached the point where they couldn't improve it any further. That motor basically just not viable anymore. They couldn't export the model into other countries because of emissions regulations, and their own domestic market was starting to shrink because the Japanese were moving in. So they designed and introduced the new unit construction 350 and 500cc Bullets, which were basically the same bike with a new engine in it. And they introduced the new Himalayan, but let's be clear, these bikes were still 1960s, 1970s technology. They were by no means cutting edge. They received a loyal but small interest from the export market, but what was most important, they were a cheap and cheerful motorcycle for the Indian market, and they had to be cheap and cheerful because the average wage in India at that point was only about £5,000 a year. Now, this served as a useful learning curve for Royal Enfield, but it wasn't going to save them. The home market was still being eaten into by the Japanese motorcycles, and of course, they were joined by the Chinese manufacturers, both of whom can produce superior motorcycles for similar or less money. And Royal Enfield's domestic market continued to shrink. So 5 years ago, we all know what happened. There was a sudden explosion of new models, new engines, and a substantial upturn in Royal Enfield's fortunes. But again, they haven't innovated. This is still 1970s technology with a smattering of 21st century electronics thrown into the bargain. All for the most part exploiting the small to medium capacity modern classic market, which has been their strength, but I also think perhaps will be their Achilles heel. You see, up until now, the modern classic sort of genre, if you like, has concentrated on British motorcycles from the golden era of British motorcycle design, the 1950s and 1960s. Now, I, like a lot of modern classic fans, love this genre of motorcycle. I never rode any of these bikes when I was younger. I grew up on Japanese bikes. But A, this class of modern classic motorcycle is all that's available to me. And B, there's a certain romanticism that's attached to that golden era that's attractive to me and a lot of other motorcyclists of my age group and younger. And no doubt that's been reinforced by the excellent marketing that Royal Enfield do. But I believe things are starting to change. You see, the modern classic customer that was buying those 1960s inspired British modern classics 20 years ago are dying out. Many have already gone and will be going, unfortunately, in the next few years. And many contact me on a regular basis saying that they still watch this channel, but they've had to give up riding because of, age-related medical conditions. Which leaves the generation that follows them, that's my generation, and the generations that sort of started riding after me, that were brought up and learned to ride on Hondas, Suzuki's, Yamahas and Kawasaki's, because that was basically all that was available to us back in the early 1980s. And I realised last year when the Honda GB350S was announced to be coming here to the UK, that there was a very strong emotional connection that I hadn't identified up until then. And a lot of enthusiastic viewers have echoed the same sentiments. They're feeling the same thing. There's that connection with their youth, that connection with their own personal history. Now, I've heard a lot of criticism from both Western viewers and Indian viewers that Honda is now simply copying Royal Enfield. But I believe that's a very naive attitude to take. It's very similar to the attitude that the British motorcycle industry took towards Japanese manufacturers back in the 1960s. And look how that ended up. Now, one example is the Honda GB350C. Everybody keeps telling me that this is just a rip-off of the Royal Enfield Classic 350. Well, I hate to break this to you, but it isn't. This is just one example, a Honda 250 Dream. From around 1957, Honda is taking inspiration from its own back catalogue. It has no need to copy from any other manufacturer. It has its own rich heritage, thank you very much. And the GB range can be traced back to about 1983-84, when Honda introduced its first modern classic motorcycle. So you see, Honda isn't really even at a disadvantage with its own heritage. It's all there. It's just been busy doing other things until the time is right, as have Yamaha, Kawasaki and Suzuki, and those three manufacturers are going to be watching out to see how the success of the GB350S pans out in the Western market. Bearing in mind that the indications are Honda is also set to release a 500cc version of this bike. Add to that the world-renowned fame of Japanese motorcycles for their quality and reliability, the demographics of the current modern classic buying customer, and the irresistible emotional ties that they have with these brands, Royal Enfield could well find that customer loyalties will start to change. As I took my time explaining at the beginning of this video, the world of motorcycling worldwide is changing. Small sub 500cc motorcycles will dominate the Western market in the future. To succeed in the future, the land of the rising sun is going to have to produce reasonably priced, small capacity, stripped down motorcycles. And let's face it, they're able to produce motorcycles of a quality that so far Royal Enfield has got close to but hasn't been able to match. Now, I mooted some years ago that this was likely to happen, and it looks like we are beginning to see that coming to fruition. I don't doubt for one moment that the Indian market will always stay loyal to the Royal Enfield brand for cultural reasons, but the rest of the world, I think, is likely to be seduced by modern classics that resonate with their own personal histories. And let's face it, dominating the worldwide motorcycle market isn't exactly something that the Japanese manufacturers haven't done before. Royal Enfield, you know, there's no doubt about it, achieved a major feat over the last 5 years, but one thing I have noticed over the last year or 18 months, not just on my videos, but by watching reviews on other channels as well, reviews of new Royal Enfield models don't get the attention that they used to get. The honeymoon period with the Western motorcyclist may well be coming to an end. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and consider subscribing to this channel if you're not already a subscriber. Now, there are other ways that you can help me out via my Patreon page or via PayPal donations, or you can just use the super thanks button down below. It's not essential, but it is much appreciated. I am of course going to be back next week, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.